when we're seeking to benefit others, we're at our best and we're happiest. There's a joy in making somebody else happy.
Janet Ettele is author of How Joyous Effort Works and 3 other insightful books that blend timeless wisdom with modern day practicality. Also, an accomplished musician, Janet draws from a deep understanding of Buddhist philosophy and the arts to create accessible and inspiring works that encourage personal growth, compassion, and mindfulness. Who doesn't need that these days? Her writing and music help readers navigate life's challenges with clarity, resilience, and a sense of joy, empowering them to cultivate a life of purpose and balance. And I will say, welcome to Uncorking a Story, Janet.
Thank you, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing great, Janet. I'm doing great. And I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
I love that you ask this question to people because I imagine there's got to be many, many different avenues to get there. But I know that for me, it wasn't on my horizon. It wasn't something that was on my radar. Um, I have read other authors' bios or heard, interviews with them, and they were avid readers. They knew from a young age they wanted to write. It was just their thing. For me, even though I could read beginning at the age of 3, I was really drawn to the piano. And I remember even as a 5-year-old, I had a little Mozart piece I was playing. And I thought, well, this is one thing to play this, but the cool thing would be to be the person that wrote the music. And eventually, a lot of life happened in between, but eventually I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston and I studied music composition there. And while pretty much every course there was about music, there was one on writing poetry. And I enrolled in that course every semester it was offered. It was taught by a man named Pat Pattison, who was a phenomenal teacher and really brought poetry to life. And he had us writing. And so that was probably my only writing instruction that I ever received. Um, After I graduated from Berklee, eventually I got married and I had 2 children. Divorced, my ex-husband stayed very present in my children's lives, but still I was having to work my way through how do I be present and home for my children and earn a living at the same time. And one of the things I did was to teach piano from home. And I had a student, an adult who worked at New York University and had put my name on the mailing list for a catalog, um, their School of Continued Professional Studies. This is really a sideways route, but it does get me to the answer to your story, to
That's
your
okay.
question.
I don't like linear paths, so this is great.
No, I've never known a linear path in my life. But anyway, I would look at this catalog and I would see courses that looked interesting. And eventually, my older son went to college. My younger son was in high school, driving, had a job. And I opened up some time where I was able to actually enroll in one of the courses because I could go in a few evenings a month and participate in this 2-year program to be certified. And in one of the books that was required reading, it was called The Mindful Coach by Douglas Silsby. And he had how a lot of authors will have little verses at the top of each chapter, little pithy quotes and things. And his several were attributed to the Buddha. But all of those really resonated very powerfully for me. And I thought, this is really interesting. And it seemed practical, logical. And so I started going. At this time, we still had Borders and bookstores that had a lot of books you could sort through and find interesting things. And I found one book after another on Buddhism, and I kept reading and reading, and it all just was so profoundly meaningful to me. But every book said, if you really want to incorporate these teachings into your life, to develop a practice and have them be part of how you live your life, you need to find a teacher. And that was a new kind of challenge because we're in Connecticut. Where do you find a Buddhist teacher?
Right.
But wouldn't you know, I got online and I found that 5 miles from my house is the Tibetan Buddhist Center for Universal Peace. It's actually donated by Morris Pace, who founded UNICEF, and he deeded it for the purposes of world peace, this whole property. And I found that place. I'd driven past it many times without even noticing it. And there I met some amazing Tibetan Buddhist monks and teachers who were just the embodiment of joy and calm and warmth and wisdom. And I started studying with them. So, what happened? I had finished the program in coaching. I was studying this Buddhist stuff. And part of the marketing for the coaching was that was like my newsletters were kind of the thing. So I'm writing newsletters, trying to weave in a common dilemma people face in life and a coaching approach to it. And organically, a lot of what the Buddhist teachings came in too, but not as overtly Buddhist. It was just, they're practical. The teachings are practical. And during one of the classes I was attending at the Buddhist Center, in one of the breaks, I met a man. We just started chatting about how practical these teachings are, and wouldn't it be nice if if the Western population, who seems so hungry for what these teachings can deliver in terms of finding some peace and calm and all of that stuff, wouldn't it be nice to find that ability to bring that in a more without religion can be so threatening and like you don't want to go
It's a
anywhere.
loaded term. It's a loaded term.
Really is. So that wasn't to me. Yes, I understand it's a religion, but to me, it's like a philosophy, and it's grounded in actual observable realities that we all know exist. Anyway, so I told him I had been working on these newsletters. Turns out he worked in publishing, and he had on his own a little side thing, an imprint that was dedicated to books on Buddhist teaching. And he told me that he had had this idea for a series of books based on a teaching known as the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, which was taught by an 8th century Buddhist monk and scholar named Master Shantideva. And he said, send me, some samples of your newsletters. So I did. And then he wrote back that he liked them. And we talked more about his idea. And he said, why don't you take a stab at writing like the first 10 pages? Well, as I said, I was never an avid reader. I never really read much fiction. I'm like, all I knew is I had always heard the saying, write what you know, right? He told me there needs to be a teacher character and a student character. So I thought, well, I'm a piano teacher. I know that, and I'll have a student. So I, wrote 10 pages like there was a lady that taught piano and a student. And it really isn't me, but it was just like the form, for the character. And he liked it. And then there was a contract to write the first book. And if we wanted to, it was conceivable we could do a second, third, and so on, because there were 6 perfections. So I did. I published the first, I published the second, we published the third. I wrote the fourth. And then something wasn't really going so well. It seemed like, well, why aren't we putting this out? Why aren't we taking it now to the next step to finish it up and print it and get it released? And I think a lot of things were going on. He's a very nice man, but I think that it finally came out. There were some complications going on. And he said, he really wasn't able to complete this project. So he reverted the rights to me. And in the agreement was a very generous, he wanted nothing because he, like me, this was all about getting these teachings out there in a way that would be palatable and hopefully meaningful and beneficial. And so we divide. I was free to then look for another publisher, but if I couldn't find another publisher, he agreed to let me publish through his imprint, using his warehousing, his sales channels and everything, but at my own expense.
Hmm.
I said, okay. So I set about 23 was out trying to find an agent. I had also been learning more and educating myself, and I was able to get a foreword written by His Holiness the Dalai Lama for this book. I, through another contact, was able to get an endorsement from Jane Goodall and an endorsement from Robert Thurman, who some people have heard of. He's well known in this field, but he's also Uma Thurman's father, so a lot of people know him from that. And that querying process, I spent a year, only a year, and I know other authors have spent many, many more years trying to do this. And I would have thought with the Dalai Lama, Jane Goodall, Bob Thurman, this would be like nothing. So when 2023 was over, I reached out to my publisher and said, you know, one of the this book is based on the teaching on joyous effort. And one of the things in joyous effort is if you're going to begin something, don't begin it unless you're sure you're going to complete it. And I'm like, I'm not completing this. And so we put the wheels in motion. His daughter is a really gifted designer, and she did all the book jacket and the layout and everything for me. And now it's in print, and it's going to be released at the end of January 28th.
So I have to go back to the beginning where you were saying, he said to you, hey, just write 10 pages and let's see what you got. And apparently your writing was good enough, even though you hadn't really written, I mean, besides newsletters and things like that, you hadn't really written this type of work before. What did you learn about yourself during the writing process?
Oh, about myself or about the process of writing through me?
Well, you could either one, actually. I'd be curious to know both.
I I found that I loved it. I loved the writing. Um, I found that there were a lot of parallels of music composition with writing words in
Yeah,
terms of
explore
phrase.
those parallels for me a little bit.
Well, if we have phrasing, we have dynamics. You know, if you know, in this particular topic, there's some of the material can be a lot to think about. And so if I've gone through there's maybe an intense part of a teaching being presented through the characters' conversations. I then feel both for myself as the person writing, but I imagine for the person reading, you need a little time to like assimilate that. So there's that dynamics. In music, we have, forte, louder periods and softer periods and staccato or legato. It's all part of creating a feeling.
Yeah.
And expressing something. The thing with music that I loved is that no words are required, and you do that. But I don't know. Have I? I don't think I've answered your
Well, I
question.
mean, but music, and just explore that theme a little bit more. Like music builds a story too. You could tell a story just through sound, through feeling. The way you might be playing the same notes, but the way you play them might change. You
Hmm.
may play softer, you may play harder, but you're building to something. And I think with music as well as with writing prose, you're building towards some kind of a resolution. You're building drama, and you want to hit some sort of resolution by the end. I'm
Yeah.
thinking like classical music here, maybe not in rock and roll as much, but who knows? Um, my mother is the musician in the family, not me. I've got a few guitars, but I don't play them well. Uh,
Okay, as long as you play them.
that's right.
Mhm.
But I think there. I love the parallels there, though, that you've identified between like sort of writing and music.
Also, I think there's sort of I don't know how to say this. I don't mean it to sound weird, but as you're a writer, you probably have found the same thing when you're doing a creative activity. I suppose whether it's cooking or gardening or whatever, there's a kind of a going really in to some kind of space and coming from that space, pulling something out of nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're doing it, like I liken it to running. So I'm a runner, and sometimes I'll go on like really long runs, and I'll lose myself in the run.
Mm,
Where time seems, and if it's a really good run, right? The weather's cooperating, I feel good, like the miles just go. And
wow.
before you know it, you're in flow. You're just
Right.
going, and maybe you get that runner's high that people talk about, which is a thing. And sometimes when I'm writing, I hit the same type of flow where I just lose time.
Mhm.
And then I'll reread whatever it is I wrote and not remember necessarily writing it. Or you're looking at it and you're questioning, like, did those words come out of my mouth? Like, I'm not that smart, but I just wrote something that's beautiful. Those moments, they happen. They do happen when you're writing, and it is called like hitting flow. Like that's a term for it. But I think it's beautiful. And like with any creative endeavor, like you might lose yourself in the activity that you're doing, particularly if you're finding joy with it. Just to bring us back to the,
Yeah.
the topic of your latest book.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful what you just described. And I think that to me, I think it's just so important that people have some sort of creative outlet.
Yeah.
It's just part of being human.
It is, and it's something we lose. Like I think we're all born with it. Like I look at my kids, I have triplets. They're 22, close to 23 now. But when they were younger, like they were all about creativity, right? They were all about playing and just like doing silly things. Or that's such a judgmental term. I shouldn't even use it. But just like being, putting on a show after dinner for all the adults. They would
Yeah.
they would write a play in the moment, or they would just
That's
draw. They
awesome.
would draw pictures, and I have their artwork all over the house, like when they were young, just like little canvases all over the house. And then something happens that you hit a certain age, you start socializing, you start maturing, and you lose it. You lose that, let's put on the show after dinner, or let's, write a story, or let's draw a picture. Like they lose it.
Yeah,
But
for
we all
sure.
have it. That's the thing. Like we have this child inside us that really wants to come out and do those things. But for some reason, we prevent ourselves. Many of us, not all of us, many of us prevent ourselves from doing it.
Well, there are an awful lot of distractions. I know growing up, I'm older than you are, but my mother didn't allow us to watch television, during the day unless, never, we could watch some television, but it was very limited. We had to be outside if it was a nice day. Another thing is we didn't, long distance phone calls were expensive. So if you wanted to be in touch with like you might Christmas or birthdays, you might call the relatives or something, but otherwise it was we were responsible to maintain a correspondence
Yeah.
with our relatives. And I had one aunt who was God, she was born in 1896. She was a great aunt. And she had that formality of letter writing that there was an arc to the letter even, and then I would learn to write back to her. So I think I learned a lot from her because you had to tell a story. This is where I went, this is what it looked like, this is who I saw, this funny thing happened, this is how I felt. So you really were, it wasn't even something you questioned, you just learned to write a story. But
Yeah.
we don't have that anymore, and sadly I'm hearing that a lot of people just have Chat GBT write the letter for them.
Oof. My one of the greatest gifts anybody ever gave me was a stack of letters I had written to my grandmother back in the 80s. Um,
Wow.
we moved to Connecticut from Florida in 83, and my grandmother was down in Florida. So I've got a stack of letters that was just correspondence between me and her. And it was like brightened my day just reading these letters. And in one of them, I had sent her $1 because she was sick, And
Oh,
this actually is in the early. So I was still living in Florida at the time, but I had sent her a duck. She, whenever like any of the grandkids were sick, she would like send us a dollar or something like that. Go buy M and M's or whatever. And I
mhm.
remember, like, I remember actually remember doing this. Like, grandma was sick, my mother was sending her a card, and I wrote a little letter, and I took a dollar out of my mother's purse, and and and
That's
I sent it to my
adorable.
grandmother, and that was one of the letters that my sister gave to me because she found the stack, and I took that dollar and I saved it. So I keep it in my passport wallet, which I have on my desk here,
Oh my
and
goodness,
the
mother.
dollar's right here.
It's
And if
looking
you,
very crisp.
I know if you look at the year, and I don't have my readers on, but I think the year, oh gosh, I can't see it. It's like 1981 or something like that. God, I wish I could see it. I need to get my
Yeah.
reader glasses, but I don't have them on me. But I never, I will. This dollar is worth more to me than, the 20 that's in my wallet right now.
See, there's something, there's a stories that, okay, so my grandmother was a children's author. She was published by Knopf back in the 30s. She and my grandfather lived in Java in Indonesia. And she that in those days you couldn't even have airmail. A letter had to go by ship. It was 6 weeks here, and then the person, if they wrote that way that very day, it would be another 6 weeks before it came back. Anyway, she died very young. I never had the opportunity to meet her. My mother was only 15 when her mother died. And when I first moved into the house where I'm living now, randomly, this cousin that I had only met once when I was 12 years old called me. Of all things, he was on his way to a dowsing convention. And he said, I have 15 years worth of correspondence from your grandmother to her sister, my, and like I was his mother in law. Would you like to have them? I said, yeah. And so I have, and I read these. It tells me the stories of her life in Java, the places they went, the way things looked, the way what my mother and her brother were like as small children. So anyway, I guess I'm kind of getting off on a tangent, but I think letter writing is a lost art, but it's sort of a precursor to writing any story.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've got the building blocks to a memoir in your possession there, Janet.
Oh,
No pressure, but you got them.
no, that's been in the back of my mind. They've been in this cupboard that you can't see for the last over 30 years. Yeah.
You mentioned it was it your grandmother who was a children's book author. It's in your blood. I mean, writing is in your blood. Maybe you didn't know it, but it's certainly there. It's certainly there, and it's now it's sort of coming out now. I'm curious about the book How Joyous Effort Works. What can you share with us about that book specifically?
Um, well, that story. Well, in this book, so the series was is one that follows the same character, and in each book, he meets a new teacher. The publisher had asked me to write this series in such a way that you could pick them up in any order, and it wouldn't matter if you hadn't read the previous books. And that was also being clueless about writing. As each book came along, I was like, this is really challenging to try to like seamlessly weave in the backstory of the previous books. So this book picks up with he goes to Troy is the main character. He's in his early 20s. He's had sort of a bad time of things when his parents divorced, kind of sent him off in a bad direction. And he went to college, really wasn't attending classes. He was drinking a lot, doing drugs, getting into a lot of fights, and basically had to come back to his father's house, who had remarried a woman who was just terrible to him. And so he had to kind of sort through that, which he did in the previous books. But with each book, he's met another teacher, and his journey on that path has progressed. And so now in this book, he meets the fourth teacher, whose name is Jules, and Jules is a luthier. Do you know what a luthier
Oh
is?
yeah, the person who makes guitars.
Yeah. And I actually went and met one up in Clinton, Connecticut, who generously spent time with me and taught me some things. So we use these luthier's techniques as sort of meditative support and metaphor for some of the teachings that take place. And so one of the quandaries for Troy is this, he's really into this study and practice, but how concerned. He also wants to have a normal life. He has a girlfriend. He'd love to marry her. He wants to have a career. He wants to do all that. And he's trying to figure out how do you balance that all out? And that's sort of his quandary throughout the book. And in the book, it goes more deeply into the teachings. And because I knew that I wasn't likely to do the fifth and sixth book, which is concentration and wisdom, I sort of try to weave that just minimally into the story too, so the readers get the benefit of the full thing.
Yeah. Question for you. I had an embarrassing moment once. I was working. My older brother owned a wine store in Greenwich, Connecticut. And someone came in, he was wearing this T-shirt saying "To love and serve" on it.
Oh,
And I said to him, "Oh, you must be really into tennis." And he's like, "No, man." He's like, I like tennis, but no, I'm a Buddhist, and it was a restaurant. It was the name of a restaurant. To
Sri
love and serve.
Chinmoy, Sri Chinmoy,
Yeah,
right? The
yeah,
Love and Serve restaurant in Greenwich. I remember that.
yeah, absolutely. And that was my introduction to Buddhism.
Was he
And
really Buddhist? Sri
what's that?
Chinmoy, was he really Buddhist? I didn't realize he was. I
I
thought it was
don't I
something
don't
else.
know, but I'm assuming at this point. I don't know. I
I
don't
don't
know.
think so. I have more stories about that, but not for now. But yeah,
Not for our consumption here. But I wanted to just focus on this idea of loving and serving. And one of the things that you were talking about earlier was kind of us being in a society where we could really use teachings like this, like the ones that you were writing, and the teachings, kind of bringing Buddhist teachings to the masses, and we're a world that really could use something, maybe not knowing it, but like in my industry. So I worked in marketing for years, and we would always say, we're swimming in data but thirsty for insight. And
mhm,
I think we're swimming in need for principles like the ones you're talking about. And I'm bringing up this idea of loving and serving because I think, in my own life, I've noticed I'm happiest when I'm in the role of serving someone else, or when I'm doing something that is giving of my time or myself to others. And I just wanted to get your take on that a little bit. In terms
absolutely.
of this, like shifting our focus in society from like sort of serving ourselves to serving others, and what that could do for us.
Right, right. Well, one of the things that is sort of one of the messages I feel very strongly about, and that I hope my books convey, is that the value of any spiritual teaching lies in its ability to be implemented into daily life. And that what you just mentioned, that love and serve, that's one of the things that we learn, is that it's when we're seeking to benefit others, we're at our best and we're happiest. Like you said, that there's a joy in making somebody else happy, or contributing something to somebody's happiness. Um, and I think that a lot of people, we can get so focused on ourselves and our own happiness, but it's almost like the more obsessed we are with ourselves, the more self-absorbed we are, the more miserable we are. And that's true, because everything is about us then. And somebody looked at you sideways, or just very reflexively offended, or it's just like this insatiable need. I need this, I need that. You just see something and you think you have to have it, and there's like such beauty and simplicity, um, such beauty and simplicity.
So what would you say would be for those listening some just practical steps for people to sort of integrate like what we're talking about here into their lives? You know, and then one of the things you were talking about earlier was, you know, just the practicality of teachings.
Mhm.
But I think people still have a hard time with it. So how would you what are some practical steps for integrating like teachings like this into someone's life?
Okay, so not that I'm not trying to plug my books, but you really, whether it's my books or something else, you really need to receive some more than me just kind of in a few minutes tossing out a few ideas. Oh, compassion and understand impermanence. I mean, I could say all these things, but there's like, well, then what do we do with that? And in the Buddhist teaching, there are three stages of wisdom. And the first is listening to teaching or reading. The second is to reflect. And that means I could tell you something, but just because I say it doesn't mean it's true. Even the Buddha said, my finger is pointing to the moon. Don't mistake my finger for being the moon. It's because of my finger that you can see the moon. And it's one of the most important things. One of the things I respect about the Buddhist teachings is you don't take it at face value. Nothing's on blind faith. You want to investigate it. So the second stage is reflecting and contemplating something. And then the third is meditation, where you really meditate on that. And that's sort of like rehearsal. Meditation is a way of familiarizing your mind to something. And that affords you the ability to, when something presents itself in your daily life, it's not that thing that's left in the cushion. It's the thing you're able to bring with you in that moment. So it's not a quick fix. It's something that really deserves the person who's doing it. If you want to benefit, you really want to receive some teachings or investigate, learn some. Um, that's the broad thing. One of the things I often talk about is that there are some universal truths that are undeniable. You don't have to have any faith in anything. We can see them. Things like impermanence is a fact of life. And when we really deeply understand impermanence, we understand the insanity of grasping on to anything like it's some solid thing, or concretizing a feeling or an emotion you're experiencing. You start to really remember, wait a second, this is going to pass. This is
I was going to say impermanence being like nothing lasts forever.
nothing. Everything's always in a chronic state of change. It's subtle. You don't see it. When I was 20 years old, I didn't look like I look now, but it was a day by day thing, and I didn't notice it every moment of every day.
Yeah, I was gonna say we could
um,
totally ruin the beauty industry just by making that real. I mean, people because people are trying to chase it and hold on to it at any cost.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's true. And then there's karma is a term you hear, but that really is the word for action, and it's when we understand cause and effect and understand our own role and in the results we receive. So we there's a lot about mindfulness where we start to really understand the quality of mind that we have when we are taking any action. What is our intention? Is it one of compassion, or is it one of revenge or resentment? You start to like cultivate some mindfulness of where, where are you and who are you being?
yeah,
And we're so busy being doing that we're seldom attentive to who we are being in our doing.
I have kind of a weird question for you, and if
Mhm.
it needs more explanation, I will explain. But I just want to get your gut reaction. What's your take on coincidences in life?
I don't think they're coincidences. I mean, I think that to me, well, I have a strong belief in karma, which is cause and effect. And so things happen, what we call there are causes and there are conditions. And when the conditions are right and that cause meets that condition, then that result will happen. Um, there can be coincidences, I suppose. Some things carry more significance than others, I guess, to our own
Mhm.
way of experiencing them. So maybe that's what it boils down to is what do you make of the coincidence?
Well, I'm just thinking about your story, and this is just what I'm taking from the early part of our conversation. And I'll probably misremember or misplay back some of these things. But you're telling me that you were playing music from a young age, led to a career in music, going to Berklee School of Music, married, divorced, wanted something to do, where you with your kids at home. So you're teaching piano. You have an adult student, gets you on a mailing list for something at NYU, takes you to NYU. So you go to NYU. You're introduced to sort of Buddhist philosophy in a book with just quotes at the top. You follow your curiosity throughout Borders Bookshop, just picking on that, for example, because it was one of my favorites in Stanford. That's now a Trader Joe's. But um, and then you realize you need a teacher, don't have a teacher. Lo and behold, you drive by a Buddhist center every day, and you follow your curiosity there, sets you on this path of meeting somebody, a publisher. Even though you've never written a book before, all of a sudden you've got at least four. So I mean, I don't, all of those things happened, and maybe they happened in that order, or maybe I misremembered,
Oh, you
but
got it.
there's no coincidences there. Like it almost seems like this was meant to be the path you were supposed to be on in this lifetime anyway.
I think there's a lot of power in that there's some momentum that we're not necessarily conscious of that propels us in our lives. But that also, I think, requires people playing an active role in that too. And I could have just looked at those Buddhist quotes and just said, huh, that's interesting, close the book. But it really spoke to me. So, it's sort of like taking those steps, following those things that come up.
Yeah. I mean, it was almost like I'd say following your curiosity, but that almost isn't a strong enough word. Maybe it's just following some movement inside you, like some spirit movement inside you that was telling you that this is a path you should be on. But it didn't need to scream it to you. Like no big major catastrophic near death experience had to happen for you to realize this. Like the light bulb went off and you were able to recognize it.
I wonder, because I don't know, but I wonder if there's that part of us that when we're in a certain situation or an environment or exposed to something, that something speaks to us and it feels right to be there.
Yeah.
And we're drawn to it. Like as a little kid, I was drawn to the piano. Um, it was just in the house, but I wasn't the only kid in the
Right.
house.
Right.
So it's, I think it's important to pay attention to those things that you feel have meaning to you, because everybody's path is so different, and to not discount that, and that's again more in a coaching term, it's like live from the inside out rather than from the outside in.
Yeah.
We're so often reacting to the things that are going on around us instead of like creating those waves ourselves.
Yeah. Which we can do. We all have the power, I believe, to create what it is we want, provided we're doing it in, this is probably the most overused term, but in an authentic way, right? Kind of living authentically, living in a way that is like natural energy inside you, versus having to fuel up on caffeine and sugar and all that other stuff. But
You
that's
know,
sort of that natural energy.
it's interesting because you said in an authentic way as if that word was overused, but I wonder if the act of being authentic is equally.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I don't think there's many. Look, all you have to do is go on social media and see everyone's perfect life to know that people aren't necessarily being their authentic selves. They're being this heightened version of what other people they think other people, should be seeing. at that time.
And you're in marketing, or that's your that. What do you? I don't like. I don't. And I know social media is almost like a necessary evil. And I don't know. What are your thoughts
I
about
mean,
it?
I think like anything, like any other tool, right? A hammer can be used to build a house or to hit somebody over the head with. Social media can be used to spread a message of positivity.
Mhm.
It could be used to spread joy. It could be used to um, promote someone's book who's talking about joyous effort, or it could be used to hurt people and tear people down. And look, we just came through an election cycle. Going on any kind of social media, you see terrible, terrible sides of humanity. So it's got the potential. It just is. It's a thing. It's got the potential to do many things. It's what we choose to do with it. That's so. It's the thing in and of itself isn't bad. It's how we choose to use it. Perhaps that's bad.
Sort of like money. It's neutral energy.
It's
It's
neutral. I think it's neutral. Yeah,
yeah.
but with the potential to be bad or good or
But
good.
it's a yeah, hard place to navigate, I guess, when you're trying to do those. It's something that maybe it doesn't come naturally to me
Yeah.
to be doing that sort of stuff. But anyway, yeah, I think those are you talk about the coincidences. And one of the things, and I wonder if this has happened to you too in your writing, when you've gotten really focused trying to find the best way to describe something, and you really have to concentrate very hard for that. I found in my experience that many times after I would walk out of the house, like within a day or so, something would happen that would literally mirror what I had just been concentrating so hard on. Like when I was trying to come up with the main character's name, Troy, I came up with a name, and I went out to there was a place that had like nice coffee, and I went into this coffee shop, and there was one kid in the shop in the back of it, and I was at the counter placing my order, and I was waiting for it, and the lady calls to the kid in the back. She goes, "Hey, Troy." Nothing world, nothing really significant, but just little random things like that, coincidences.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think it's one of those things where sort of the skeptic out there will say, "Well, the name Troy was on your mind, so you're just more attuned to it
Mhm.
when you hear it, right?" And other people have said, "Hey, I'm thinking about buying a car," and then all of a sudden you see that make or model wherever it is you're looking.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe those aren't great parallel examples, but I do believe that the universe, like we do manifest certain things, and we can bring those things, like once like thoughts become actions, actions become things. I do think that there is something to that. I mean, at least I want to live in the world where that's true.
Well, yeah, because you're a creative person and you sort of understand the flow of creativity.
Yeah,
Probably.
that's the nicest thing anyone said to me today.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad I said it.
That's it's because I go to New York City almost every day, and
Oh, do you?
you know it's usually people bumping me on the subway. But
Yeah. Okay.
enough about me.
Yeah.
Jenna, one of the things I like to do is also get to know my guests a little bit through some pop culture questions. And I know you mentioned when you were younger, like TV was limited, but I'm curious when you were younger, if you could watch anything, what were you drawn to? What type of shows were you drawn to as a kid?
Well, I have to say, anyone that knows me well would crack up that I'm being asked the pop culture question because they know that I'm so void of things. But I also know that this is one of the questions you like to ask. So I thought about it as a kid. I remember loving uh, Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie, Gilligan's Island.
Hmm.
What else? I Love Lucy. With my older brother, he was 7 years older, so he had a different sense of humor, and we would watch F Troop. I don't know if you remember
Oh,
that.
sure. I remember that. Yeah.
McHale's Navy. And with my older sister, it was The Wild Wild West and Mission Impossible.
No, I loved Mission Impossible, but the I have to go back to like I Dream of Jeannie and even Bewitched. It's like I don't know that those shows hold up in today's day and age. I'm thinking about Barbara Eden. Being someone's like almost like slave in a bottle until master needs her. Like it's like, can you imagine like pitching that show in today's modern era? It's like, yes, Larry Hagman is going to play Major so and so. I can't even remember his name, but he's going
Tony,
to have
Tony
what's that?
Nelson. Tony Nelson, I think was his name, wasn't it? Major Nelson.
Major Nelson, yeah. And it's like, okay, well, he's going to have access to this woman who will grant him his every wish. She's going to live in a bottle, and she's going to wear skimpy clothing, like she's part of a harem. I tried pitching that in today's day and age. It
That
wouldn't
is
happen.
hilarious. I've never thought about that, but you're absolutely right.
That would actually be a really like if I were an SNL writer, like that would be a really funny sketch pitching shows from the '60s in today's day and age. Make room for daddy. Father knows best. Leave it to Beaver. Even the titles would be like, can you imagine? Oh, now we're going down a dark path.
Yeah. But you're right. I love Lucy as a kid, and then now you can see like snippets of them now. All the 50 years later, and you see how Lucy couldn't do anything without conniving and trying to plead for Ricky to let her do what she needed to do.
Yeah, but she broke the rules though, which was great. I mean,
Thank
that's what she broke the rules, and
you.
I love that show. Like, what married couple sleeps in twin beds? I guess maybe just the Ricardos, but
Probably more than we know.
yeah, that's right. Maybe
Maybe in that time.
that's right. That's right. What about? I know you were into music. What did you like listening to growing up?
Oh my gosh. Well, of course, the Beatles, the Grateful Dead, Led Zeppelin, Little Feat, Leon Russell. Um, who else I loved? Who I loved is John McLaughlin and the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And John McLaughlin was one of the Sri Chinmoy people, the Love and Serve.
Hmm.
So he was amazing, or is amazing because he's still alive. Uh, he played with Billy Cobham. Are you familiar with him?
I'm not. No.
And Jan Hammer, um, Chick Corea. I
Hmm.
love Keith Jarrett. So many. I mean, those are just contemporary or relatively. I, I'm older, so I'm not really. I know who Taylor Swift is, and I've heard some of her music, and it's lovely, but it's not my,
Yeah.
my. But good for her. But music is. I kind of miss the richness of like Paul Simon.
Hmm.
When I was studying, okay, at Berklee, they said if you with music, if you have lyrics, if you have complicated lyrics, you would want simple music. If you have complicated music, you would want simple lyrics. I didn't just say the same thing twice, did I?
No, no, no. All
Okay.
good.
And I thought when I listened to Paul Simon, he has the ability to blend both. The
Yeah.
music is sophisticated, the lyrics are sophisticated and thoughtful, and yeah. So many. I'm sure there are others I have left off.
Yeah. I listened to his album Graceland. I can't tell you how
Oh,
many times. My father would. So my brother and I had a paper route in the town we live in, Stanford. And Sundays, obviously, the papers are very big. They're heavy.
right.
So, Monday through Saturday, my brother and I are on our bikes. We're walking, we're doing our paper route. Sundays, dad would drive us because the papers were so heavy. And every Sunday, we had a cassette of Paul Simon Graceland, and we listened to it, front to back during that paper route. And dad actually took us to see Paul Simon, not for the Graceland tour, but the one after, which was the Rhythm of the Saints. And
Really?
that was my first ever concert. And it was amazing. Amazing. I was a metalhead at the time, but I love Paul Simon. His catalog of music is it's just beautiful. And lives around the corner practically.
He's in New Canaan.
Yeah.
Both my sons. My older son is a phenomenal drummer, and my younger son is a bass player. And since they were like toddlers, they used to pretend they were in bands together. So to have a bass player and a drummer that are that tight together is a nice feature in a band. And they were playing at a place in New Canaan, and Paul Simon was in there.
No kidding.
And can you imagine, there's my son on bass and Paul Simon is,
Yeah,
that would be more than a little intimidating, I would think.
absolutely. When was this? When about was this?
Oh boy. Would have been, I don't know. I know they graduated high school in 2007, 2005. So it was after that, maybe, you know what? I've lost track of time. I don't know, 2011?
Yeah, yeah, I'm just wondering because my wife and I would go out to dinner in New Canaan like twice a week back in those days. So I'd be curious
Gate,
to know
is
where
Gates
they were
still there?
playing. Gates,
Is,
yeah, right, yeah. It's under new ownership. I did comedy at Gates a few times. It's a good spot.
you're a comedian too?
Well, I attempt.
Oh, that's great.
I attempt.
You should write those skits for SNL.
I
That would
know. I'm
be
too old. They won't take. I'm too much of a. I almost said boomer, but I'm not a boomer. I'm Gen X. I'm Gen X. Squarely Gen X.
you're still young.
Yeah, I still got a couple years left. I hope.
And if you can run as many miles as you can run, I think that you can probably outrun somebody, 20 years younger than you easily.
We'll see. We'll see. One more question for you, Janet. And this is always it's either the toughest one or the easiest one for people to answer. And that's if you can go back in time and whisper some words of advice into your younger self's ear, what would you tell the younger Janet? What kind of advice would you give your younger self?
One would be to listen to my intuition more, to know that it's there and trust it. Um, Another would be, I don't know how I could have done it, but when I was 14, my parents divorced and it like threw me. They sent me away to boarding school at a Quaker comedy. It was a Quaker commune farm school where it was a free school. You had no grades, you had no tests. And there were 42 students for 10th through 12th grade. And I really don't know what I learned there. I learned how to milk cows. I learned how to shovel manure from the barn and collect eggs from the chickens. And I would have told myself, I tried to run away from that school, but I got caught. I would have told myself to get out of that school and find a school that would have actually been much more enriching in terms of some academic value.
Yeah, I don't even know like how to find a Quaker boarding school. Like, it's like of all the places you could be sent, it's not like they had the internet back then either. It's not like where can we send Janet? Oh, I got it. Boom, first hit, Quaker meeting school or Quaker. I don't like. How do you find one of those?
I was on a commune, but it was the era of the 70s, and that was communes were kind of a thing, and a free school. I think it was kind of inspired by there was a book called Summerhill, where it was just an alternative approach to learning. I think in theory it was good. There was a lot of good that I got from that because the Quakers have this practice of silence a lot. In fact, their graduation ceremony was 45 minutes of silence in the barn.
That sounds perfect for me right now. Like, I wish I could find 45 minutes in the day to be surrounded by silence, but
And that was a good thing I got from that was because without knowing it, it was sort of early meditation. Um, there were good things. I make light of it, but it wasn't. I think I could have benefited from a bit more traditional education and been exposed to a greater variety of things. So that would have been. And I did. I have to say, I did try to run away, but it didn't work.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know they tried to get off of Gilligan's Island too, and that didn't work. But the thing is, if they would have gotten off, then there wouldn't have been, another season. So
That would have been a problem.
that would
Yeah.
have been a problem for the writers. I mean, they would have been out of work.
Well,
Uh,
the writers had a hand in that.
well, fair enough. Like, wait a minute, if we get them off, there goes our job security. Let's keep them there.
Let's keep them there.
What always bothered me that the professor could make a radio out of coconuts and an exercise bike, but he couldn't fix a hole in a boat. Like,
where did he get an exercise bike?
Exactly. Like but they would make it. Like I think they made an exercise bike, but still, we could poke holes. We would poke holes in the storylines of Gilligan's Island all day, but I think the audience would get upset and probably sick of me talking about.
We're really digressing, but
we've digressed.
But it's a fun digression. So,
well, as we wrap up here, Janet, where can people learn more about you if they're so inclined to do so?
My website is my name, janetettele.com. And should I spell my last name because it's tricky?
I will put it in the show notes. So all people have to do is look in the show notes and they can just tap their little fingers right onto it. So,
all right. Well, this was wonderful meeting you and speaking with you, and wish you all the best.
Yes. And I will say, Janet, thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Stay well.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.